Saying that everything is information isn't very helpful for people who like to believe that there is a physical reality out there. It means essentially that the world is an abstraction, malleable by interpretation, and merely a collection of prevailing beliefs. Information as a linguistic object is a rather undiscerning metaphor. Metaphor is, for most people, a device of poetic imagination, yet it is much more pervasive in everyday life than most people assume. Our ordinary conceptual system, in terms of which we both think and act, is fundamentally metaphorical in nature.
There are no things without language. Language is the mother of all things. When you look around and there seems to be things all around you, that's because you speak. It's because we speak that there seem to be things, but there aren't things without language. Things is a word. I might even say that even the things that look to be objects, they're really events. They're complicated dances of electrons and swirling processes below the level that we can see. But even there, those are just more words. I think part of the difficulty in understanding language is that when we try to understand what's outside of language, we have to use language to do so. We always already stand within language as we try to talk about what's outside of it.
There's the scientific theory, which says the world is tiny packets of matter squealing along through empty space at close to the speed of light and subject to a certain set of interlocking laws. That's what science tells us the world is. Another theory is, and to my mind, a much more appealing and even intuitively correct theory, is the world is language. The world is made of language. We can say that the world is composed of little demons doing calisthenics, each one the size of a pissant's eyebrow. Or we can say the world is made out of wave mechanical packets of matter flying along at the speed of light. But notice that what we get each time is words. Our model of what the world is made of words. And the world is composed of description.
Language is the medium by which we transmit our thoughts. The language we use to communicate does fundamentally affect how we see the world. Language structures thought, at least to the same degree that it reflects thought. For the most part, we live in a world constructed by language. What and how we see the world is tied directly to how we describe it. Linguistic relativity was first suggested by Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf when they noticed that differences in language reflect the different views of different people. The Hopi, for example, do not include references to the past, present or future in their grammars, although they do include two other tenses, manifested and becoming manifested. Manifested includes all that is and ever has been physically. This includes the senses and concrete items. Becoming manifested includes anything which is not physical, has no definite origin, and cannot be perceived with the senses. Verbs always expressed within terms of these two tenses. In this way, the Hopi do include some aspect of time, but in a different way than a native English speaker would recognize. The separation of the imaginal world and objective world didn't exist for the Hopi. Whorf argues that many ancient cultures conceived of thought as an active, all-pervasive energy in the physical world, much like how we perceive electromagnetism. The Hopi thought world had no imaginary space. Another example of ethno-linguistics is with regards to spatial orientation using cardinal directions. For example, a person might think at sunset when facing north that their left leg is their west leg, whereas if they were facing south, their right leg would be their west leg. As a further example of linguistic relativity, in one study, German and Spanish speakers were asked to describe objects having opposite gender assignment. The descriptions they gave differed in a way predicted by grammatical gender. For example, when asked to describe a key, a word which is masculine in German and feminine in Spanish, the German speakers were more likely to use words like hard, heavy, jagged, metal, serrated, and useful, whereas Spanish speakers were more likely to say golden, intricate, little, lovely, shiny, and tiny. Speakers of different languages notice different things, and so make different distinctions. For example, when Koreans say that one object joins another, They specify whether the objects touch tightly or loosely, whereas English speakers, in contrast, say whether the object is in or on another. Saying "I put the spoon cup" is not correct in either language. The spoon has to be in or on the cup in English, and has to be held tightly or loosely by the cup in Korean. Consider some other language oddities, such as in some cultures the meat of a pig is called pork, yet in other cultures it is called pig, whether the animal is dead or alive. We can translate idioms, but not realize that the cultural meanings are not transported across out of our set of symbols. Saying "I could eat a horse" in front of some peoples, they may well assume that you really do want to eat a horse. Likewise, in English cultures, the heart is considered a symbol of courage, love, and strength, whereas in other cultures, those attributes are assigned to the liver. We can only establish knowledge about something through its interaction with something else. Nothing takes on a meaning by itself. Meaning and existence comes only through interaction and relationship. In this way, the linguistic associations we build do profoundly affect how we see the world. This still might be a hard thing to comprehend. Sure, we might be talking about the same thing but describing it differently, but a tennis ball is always going to be a tennis ball, right? Unfortunately, it isn't as simple as that. As people like Robert Anton Wilson point out, the only reality we know is the one which we interpret through our nervous system. Niels Bohr said, "We are suspended in language in such a way that we cannot say what is up and what is down." George Hegel said, "To question language is to question being." Whilst I have no academic background in linguistics or communication theory, I feel that studying the relationship between language and reality is instrumental to being able to think at higher levels and find degrees of logic and reasoning. After all, language is literally the bridge for the psyche to telepathically communicate with itself. Benjamin Lee Whorf said, "A change in language can transform our apprehension of the cosmos." Ludwig Wittgenstein believed that the foundation of language and linguistic meaning is the very basis of philosophy. Given my own research and what is presented in this series, I am inclined to agree. For those wishing to examine this more closely, I would recommend studying the Trivium.
A dog cannot lie. Neither can he be sincere. A dog may be expecting his master to come. Why can't he be expecting him to come next Wednesday? Is it because he doesn't have language? If a lion could speak, we would not be able to understand what he said. Why do I say such a thing?
If we could understand him, I shouldn't think we'd have too much trouble with a lion.
We could get an interpreter. Do you mean for me or for the lion? Yes, we could get an interpreter. But what possible use would that be? To imagine a language is to imagine a form of life. It's what we do and who we are that gives meaning to our words. I can't understand a lion's language because I don't know what his world is like. How can I know the world a lion inhabits?
In order for two people to understand each other and communicate effectively, they must both share a similar set of associations within the linguistic landscape built up from their experiences. Words occupy a semiotic space. The illustration shown on the screen shows the space for the word bird. Words are symbols that refer not to things, but to our ideas about things. No word refers simply to one idea, but to a range of ideas conceptualized as a space. Within this space are a number of acceptable definitions of the word, the more acceptable being nearer the center and the less acceptable closer to the edge. When is a tree not a tree? When it's a tree. George Gurdjieff remarked that we live in a circle of the confusion of tongues, and suggested we need to build a language upon the principles of relativity in order to introduce relativity into all concepts and therefore make it possible to determine the angle of thought. This analogy of geometric communication is something which Wittgenstein also reiterated. In order for a picture to represent a certain fact, it must in some way possess the same logical structure as the fact. Therefore, linguistic expression can be seen as a form of geometric projection. Language may change its form of projection, but the logical structure of the expression is the unchanging geometric relationships. This analogy of a sphere of connectiveness is also similar to the analogy I gave earlier of a car being made of parts and subparts that communicate or interface with each other. Our evolution as a species depends on the evolution of our language. As McKenna said, we can only move as fast as the evolution of our language. Robert Anton Wilson said, "You don't need to take drugs to hallucinate. Improper language can fill your world with phantoms and spooks of many kinds." Our descriptions limit how we move through space and the possibilities we can imagine in relation to the manipulation of objects. E' is a subset of the English language that was inspired by Alfred Korzybski's work on general semantics. It is designed to reduce the possibility for misunderstanding by removing certain words like is, and therefore it highlights the subjectivity of the statement. For example, in English, Beethoven is better than Mozart can be rewritten in E' as, in my present mixed state of musical education and ignorance, Beethoven seems better than Mozart to me. What may seem like linguistic anality is actually quite effective at demonstrating how ambiguous and abstract language really is. It also shows how much we assume is implied within the words we speak. In many ways, the fact that the English language has divided the noun and the verb does the English speaker a great disservice. Nowhere is there a noun not participating in a process, nor a verb not embodied in physical matter. For example, it is raining. Where is the it that would, according to the statement, be doing the raining? A more logical statement would be, rain is going on. If we look unassumingly at the natural world, its interconnected nature is hard to miss. Nowhere in nature do we find separate categories of the sentence. All in nature goes together. Our unconscious assumptions contaminate pure reality, making it impossible for the philosopher to see past the self-invented syntax of his mind. Unfortunately, most people take language for granted and don't give much thought to its logical comprehension or how it affects them. Ambiguity easily arises from the phantasmagorical image that words create. The word dog provides a different image, for instance, for a Swiss mountaineer, an Arctic explorer, a British hunter, and an Illinois farmer. Daniel Gilbert, professor at Harvard University, says, "We live in a world in which people are beheaded, imprisoned, demoted, and censured simply because they have opened their mouths, flapped their lips, and vibrated some air." Whereas Martin Heidegger said, "Man acts as though he were the shaper and master of language, while in fact language remains the master of man." The things we know are the things that we can apprehend linguistically. The things that we don't know linguistically are the things that can't be seen, i.e. metaphysical. We are caught within the syntax of our own language. All philosophical undertakings must be done using language, and therefore no thoughts can escape the unconscious metaphysical assumptions built into language. The languages we are taught become one of the primary programs that control us, and also one of the hardest embedded programs to see beyond. This will be explored further later on.